My name is Emily, and I was 32 years old when my father passed away. What happened in the days and weeks following his funeral wasn't just grief. It was a betrayal so profound. It shattered everything I thought I knew about my own family. They told me, point blank, to get over it, but what came next was even worse. I'm going to tell you the full story, how I took that pain, that deep, gaping wound, and turned it into something that saved me. Before I dive in, if you're listening from somewhere in the world, let me know where you are in the comments below. And if you've ever felt like your own family didn't understand or validate your pain, please hit that like button so I know I'm not alone. If you want to hear more stories like mine, stories about navigating toxic relationships and finding your own strength, make sure to subscribe. Growing up, my dad was my anchor. My mother was difficult. She was mercurial, her moods shifting like the wind, and her affections were conditional, often tied to whether I was meeting some unspoken standard of hers. My older brother, David, and my younger sister, Sarah, navigated her complexities in their own ways. David became fiercely protective of her, often acting as a buffer, or sometimes mirroring her critical nature. Sarah, younger and more sensitive, often retreated, avoiding conflict altogether. I, on the other hand, seemed to be the one who constantly bumped up against my mother's expectations, always feeling like I fell short. Dad was the opposite. He was steady, kind, and saw me. He saw my efforts, my struggles, my genuine heart. He was a quiet man, a carpenter by trade, with hands that were calloused and strong, but capable of incredible gentleness. He taught me how to hammer a nail straight, how to measure twice and cut once, how to appreciate the beauty in simple things. He was the one I went to with my problems, the one who offered quiet advice or simply a comforting presence. He didn't always understand the complexities of my mother's behavior, but he always validated my feelings about it. Just remember who you are, he'd say, his eyes warm. Don't let anyone else define you. His illness was sudden. Aggressive cancer, discovered late. The diagnosis felt like a physical blow. The following months were a blur of hospital visits, hushed conversations with doctors, and the slow, painful decline of the man I loved more than anyone. We all rallied, of course. My mother, surprisingly, became intensely focused on his care, though even then, her anxiety often manifested as sharp words or demands directed at the nurses or us. David took charge of practical matters, organizing schedules, dealing with insurance. Sarah tried her best to be present, but the weight of it all seemed to crush her, making her even more withdrawn. I spent as much time as I could just sitting with Dad, holding his hand, talking about anything and everything, trying to soak up every last moment of his presence. When he finally passed, it felt like the world tilted off its axis. The silence in the house was deafening. The days leading up to the funeral were a blur of casseroles arriving at the door, distant relatives offering condolences that felt hollow, and the constant, suffocating presence of grief. My mother was stoic, almost brittle, occasionally breaking down in private but mostly maintaining a rigid composure in front of others. David was efficient and practical, handling the endless paperwork and arrangements. Sarah was tearful and quiet, clinging to me sometimes, needing comfort neither of us truly had to give. I felt numb. A deep, aching emptiness had taken root in my chest, spreading outwards, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. I went through the motions, helping with arrangements, greeting guests, accepting hugs that felt more like obligations than comfort. Sleep offered no respite, only restless hours filled with fragmented memories and the sharp pain of realizing he was gone. The funeral itself was a haze. Seeing his coffin, hearing the eulogies, it felt unreal, like watching a movie of someone else's life. I remember standing by the grave, the cold earth a stark contrast to the warmth he had always radiated. A wave of raw, unadulterated grief hit me then, a sob tearing from my throat that felt like it was pulling me apart from the inside out. My sister Sarah put an arm around me, her own face streaked with tears. My brother David stood beside my mother, both looking composed, perhaps a little weary. After the burial, we returned to my parents' house. The air was thick with the smell of wilting flowers and lingering sadness. People milled about, talking in hushed tones, picking at food no one really wanted to eat. I found a quiet corner, needing a moment to just exist with my grief, away from the performative nature of public mourning. I closed my eyes, trying to conjure my dad's smile, the sound of his laugh. That's when my mother found me. She walked over, her expression unreadable, a mix of exhaustion and something else I couldn't quite place. David followed a few steps behind her. "Emily," she said, her voice low but edged with impatience. "Are you all right? You're looking distraught." I opened my eyes, surprised by her bluntness.
I'm
heartbroken, Mother." I managed, my voice raspy. "I just lost my father." She sighed, a sharp, exasperated sound. David shifted uncomfortably behind her. "Yes, we all have, Emily," she said, her tone hardening. "But the funeral is over now. There's nothing more to be done here today. You need to pull yourself together. It's not helpful to be so emotional. You'll upset everyone else." I stared at her, my grief momentarily eclipsed by shock. "Upset everyone else?" I repeated slowly. "Mother, I am grieving. He was my dad. And he was my husband," she retorted, her voice rising slightly. "But life goes on, Emily. We have things to deal with. The house, the estate. You can't just fall apart. You need to be strong, like David." She gestured towards my brother, who offered a small, strained nod. That's when David spoke up, his voice gentler than hers, but carrying the same dismissive underlying message.
"Yeah, Eminencia.
"It's hard, I know, but you gotta be strong. For Mom. For Sarah. You can't dwell on it. You just gotta get over it." Get over it? The words hung in the air between us, cold and cruel. Get over losing my dad? It's only been a few hours since we buried him. My mother's face hardened further. "Don't be dramatic, Emily. We all feel the loss. But some of us are able to handle it with dignity and composure. You need to stop this moping and think about what needs to be done." I felt a hot surge of anger mixed with my overwhelming sadness. Dignity? Composure? Was openly grieving for my father somehow undignified? Were they truly suggesting I simply switch off the pain? "I can't believe you're saying this," I whispered, my voice trembling. "How can you be so cold?" "I am not cold, Emily," my mother snapped. "I am being practical."
Someone has to be.
"And it seems that person is me, because you're too busy indulging in your own sorrow." Indulging? My own sorrow? The unfairness of it took my breath away. This wasn't some manufactured drama. This was the raw, agonizing reality of losing a parent, half of my world. "This isn't about practicality," I exclaimed, tears welling again despite my efforts to control them. "This is about grief. Real grief. And you seem to think you're the only one experiencing it," David interjected, his tone sharper now. "We're all hurting, Emily, but we're not making a scene." I looked from his face to my mother's, searching for any flicker of understanding, any hint that they recognized the enormity of what they were asking. There was nothing. Just impatience and a thinly veiled accusation that my very real pain was an inconvenience, a performance, something selfish. In that moment, something shifted inside me. The anchor I had lost wasn't just my dad. It was the fragile illusion of a supportive family that understood love and loss in the same way I did. They saw my grief not as a natural response to a devastating event, but as a problem to be fixed, a weakness to be overcome quickly and quietly. The pain of their words, the dismissal of my sorrow, layered onto the pain of my loss, creating a new, sharper kind of hurt. I couldn't stay there anymore, surrounded by people who seemed to fundamentally misunderstand me at my most vulnerable moment. I mumbled something about needing air and fled the house, walking for hours until the initial shock and hurt began to settle into a dull, heavy ache. That was just the beginning. The phrase "get over it" became the unofficial mantra of the weeks that followed. Every time I mentioned my dad, shared a memory, or expressed how much I missed him, I was met with subtle or not-so-subtle signals that I was dwelling, that I was being morbid, that I needed to move on. My mother would change the subject abruptly. David would make a comment about focusing on the future. Sarah, caught between her own sadness and the pressure from our mother, would just look away awkwardly. But it wasn't just the emotional invalidation. The betrayal deepened when discussions turned to my father's estate. My dad, being a practical man, had left a will. It was simple, dividing his assets, primarily the family home and some savings, between my mother, David, Sarah, and myself. He had also left me a specific, sentimental item, his old woodworking tools, the ones he had taught me with, along with a small, separate sum of money specifically earmarked for setting up my own little workshop, something we had often talked about doing together someday. When the will was read by the lawyer, my mother's reaction to my portion was immediate and hostile. A workshop? What does Emily need a workshop for? She has a perfectly good job. Those tools should stay here for family history. And that money, it should go towards something more practical, like updating the house. The lawyer, a kindly older man who had known my father, looked uncomfortable. Meredith, your husband's will is quite clear. He stipulated that these tools and this specific sum of money were for Emily, to fulfill a shared dream of theirs. A shared dream, she scoffed. He humored her little hobbies. He would have wanted his assets used wisely, for the family's benefit, not frittered away on sawdust. I was stunned. My father's last wishes, his specific act of love and encouragement towards me, were being not just questioned, but actively undermined and belittled by my own mother, just days after we had buried him. Mother, this was Dad's wish, I said, my voice trembling again, this time with indignation. He knew how much those tools meant to me, how much I loved woodworking with him. Nonsense, she said, waving a dismissive hand. He was probably just being nice. You don't seriously think he expected you to become a carpenter, do you? Be realistic, Emily. David chimed in then, siding with my mother.
Yeah, Eminencia.
It makes sense, right? The house needs work. That money could really help Mom out now. He looked at me, as if expecting me to readily agree to give up my inheritance. Sarah remained silent, her eyes fixed on the floor. This wasn't just about money or tools. This was about my father's legacy, his love for me, and my family's willingness to erase or rewrite it to suit their own convenience or perceived need. My mother's assertion that Dad was just humoring me, that he didn't really mean for me to have those things, felt like a direct attack on my bond with him, a bond they seemed jealous of or determined to dismantle. It felt like she was trying to diminish my importance in his life, and, by extension, my grief. I refused to back down. No, I said firmly, finding a reserves of strength I didn't know I had. Dad wanted me to have these things. They are important to me because they were important to him and to our relationship. I won't agree to giving them up. My mother's face flushed with anger. So, you're choosing tools over your family? Over helping your grieving mother? That's a cruel way to put it, Mother, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm honoring Dad's wishes. And I would hope my family would honor them too. The argument escalated, quickly becoming heated and ugly. Accusations flew. My mother accused me of being selfish, of never caring about anyone but myself, of trying to take advantage of her widowhood. David joined in, calling me ungrateful and stubborn. Sarah finally spoke, pleading with us all to stop fighting, her voice small and weak. I left that meeting feeling not just hurt, but violated. My family, the people who should have been my support system, were actively trying to take something precious from me, something my father had given me, and framing my refusal to comply as an act of cruelty against them. The get over it extended beyond my grief. It applied to my connection with my father, to his memory, to anything that didn't fit their narrative or serve their immediate needs. The atmosphere between us became thick with resentment and suspicion. Every interaction felt like navigating a minefield. My mother would make passive-aggressive comments about the will, about how some people were more concerned with material possessions than family ties. David would act distant, barely speaking to me. Sarah was caught in the middle, clearly distressed by the conflict but unable to stand up to our mother. They started excluding me. Family dinners were held without inviting me, and I'd only find out about them later through social media or overheard conversations. Decisions about my father's belongings, things that were meant to be shared or discussed, were made without my input. When I asked about something, I was met with vague answers or told it had already been dealt with. They created a wall, using my grief and the estate as bricks. The misrepresentation wasn't confined to their actions. It spread through their words to other relatives. Cousins who had been sympathetic after the funeral suddenly seemed cooler, their conversations with me shorter. I overheard snippets of conversations where my mother was telling family friends how difficult I was being, how I was making things harder for her during a vulnerable time, how I was selfishly clinging to things instead of supporting the family. I felt like I was going crazy. Was I being selfish? Was my grief excessive? Was I misinterpreting my father's intentions? Their constant invalidation and gaslighting began to chip away at my sense of reality. I would replay conversations in my head, questioning my reactions, wondering if maybe they were right, and I was just being overly sensitive or dramatic. The emotional toll was immense. I developed insomnia, lying awake for hours, my mind racing with anger, sadness, and confusion. My appetite disappeared, and I lost weight. The constant stress manifested physically as tension headaches and a perpetual knot in my stomach. I felt isolated, not only by my family's actions, but by the shame of it all. How could my own family treat me this way? Why was I the target of their resentment? I tried, several times, to talk to my mother and David, to explain how their actions were hurting me, to ask for understanding, for a chance to grieve together instead of being pushed away. Each time, it was met with denial, deflection, or further accusations. "You're imagining things, Emily," my mother would say dismissively. "We're not excluding you. You just haven't been around," even though they hadn't told me when they were getting together. "You're the one causing problems," David said during one particularly painful phone call. "Mom is going through a lot, and you're just making it worse with all this drama about the will and how you feel." Their refusal to acknowledge my feelings or their behavior was soul-crushing. It wasn't just that they didn't understand my pain. They actively worked to increase it and make me feel like I was the problem. The betrayal felt absolute. The people who were supposed to love and support me unconditionally had turned their backs when I needed them most, choosing resentment and material gain over familial bonds and my well-being. I sank into a deep depression. There were days I could barely get out of bed. The world felt gray and hopeless. My work suffered. Friendships felt difficult to maintain because I didn't know how to explain the depth of the dysfunction I was experiencing. It felt like I was drowning in a sea of grief, betrayal, and misunderstanding, with no hand reaching out to pull me up. One particularly low evening, sitting alone in my apartment, surrounded by the quiet weight of my sadness, I looked at a photograph of my dad. He was smiling, his eyes full of warmth and kindness. And I remembered what he used to say, "Just remember who you are, Em. Don't let anyone else define you." His words resonated deep within me. I had allowed my family's narrative to define me. I had allowed their accusations and dismissals to make me question my own worth, my own sanity, my own grief. I had been so focused on trying to gain their validation, their understanding, that I had lost sight of myself. In that moment, sitting there in the darkness, something shifted again. This wasn't just pain, it was potential energy. The pain of their betrayal, of their coldness, of their misrepresentation, was immense. But what if I stopped fighting them for validation and started using that energy to rebuild myself? What if I took their attempts to diminish me and instead used them as fuel to become stronger, more independent, more me? This was the turning point. I realized that I couldn't control their behavior, their perceptions, or their willingness to understand. Their actions were a reflection of them, not of me or my worthiness to grieve or inherit my father's legacy. My pain wasn't something to get over in the way they meant it, by burying it and pretending it didn't exist. My pain was a part of my journey, a testament to the depth of my love for my father and the wound inflicted by those who should have protected me. But I could choose what I did with that pain. I could let it destroy me, or I could channel it. I started small. The first step was accepting that I was not going to get the validation or apology I craved from my mother or David. This was incredibly difficult, like mourning another loss, the loss of the family I had hoped to have. But accepting it freed up emotional energy. Then I started setting boundaries. This was new and terrifying. My family wasn't used to me saying no, to me pushing back. My mother called, demanding I come over and help her sort through some of Dad's things that weekend, even though I had prior commitments. In the past, I would have canceled my plans, feeling guilty or obligated. This time, I took a deep breath and said, "I can't this weekend, Mother. I already have plans. I can come next week, or perhaps we can schedule a specific time." Silence on the other end. Then, her voice, tight with disbelief and irritation. "You have plans? Your father just passed away and you have plans?" "Yes, Mother," I said, trying to keep my voice calm but firm. "Life doesn't stop entirely. I made these plans before you called, and I need to keep them. I am offering to help at another time." "Fine," she snapped and hung up. It felt awful in the moment, the familiar pang of guilt and her obvious displeasure. But beneath that, there was a tiny spark of something new: agency. I had prioritized my own needs and commitments, something I rarely felt permitted to do around her. Next came the boundary around the inheritance. I contacted the lawyer myself, ensuring that my father's specific wishes regarding the tools and the workshop money were carried out precisely as written in the will. My mother and David were furious. There were more angry calls, more accusations of greed and selfishness. "How could you go behind my back?" my mother shrieked over the phone. "Trying to steal things. Your father would be ashamed of you." "He wouldn't be ashamed of me honoring his wishes," I countered, my voice stronger now. "He would be ashamed of you trying to deny them. This isn't about stealing, Mother. This is about his legacy and what he wanted for me." David sent me angry texts, telling me I was tearing the family apart. I didn't respond. I realized that engaging with their anger and accusations only pulled me back into their toxic dynamic. I couldn't argue my way to their understanding. I could only protect myself and stand firm in my truth. Setting these boundaries wasn't a single event. It was a process. It meant saying no to last-minute demands, refusing to engage in circular arguments, declining invitations to gatherings where I knew I would be treated with passive aggression or exclusion, and limiting contact when necessary. It meant accepting that my relationship with my family was fundamentally changed, perhaps irrevocably so. Simultaneously, I started actively working on my healing. I found a therapist who specialized in grief and family dynamics. Talking to someone unbiased, someone who validated my experiences and helped me understand the patterns of behavior I was dealing with, was life-changing. She helped me see that my family's reaction wasn't a reflection of my inadequacy, but a manifestation of their own issues: my mother's inability to cope with loss and relinquish control, David's need for her approval, Sarah's passive avoidance. I also started connecting with friends more deeply, allowing myself to be vulnerable and accept their support. I joined a grief support group where I met others who understood the complex, messy nature of mourning. It was incredibly comforting to be around people who didn't tell me to get over it, but instead sat with me in my pain, offering empathy and understanding. And I started using my father's tools. At first, it was just puttering around in my apartment, sanding a small piece of wood, feeling the familiar weight of his hammer in my hand. It connected me to him in a way that nothing else could. Slowly, cautiously, I began working on small projects, things he had taught me how to make. As I worked, the focus required, the feel of the materials, the quiet hum of the tools, it all became a form of meditation, a way to channel my turbulent emotions into something tangible, something productive. The small sum of money he had left me allowed me to rent a tiny shared workshop space, giving me a dedicated place to work. My pain didn't disappear, but it began to transform. The raw, debilitating ache started to morph into a bittersweet sorrow, laced with the quiet strength I was discovering within myself. The resentment towards my family was still there, but it no longer consumed me. It became a reminder of the lessons I had learned, the boundaries I needed to maintain. The climax of this period came several months later. It was Thanksgiving, a holiday that had always been important to our family. I hadn't seen my mother or David much since the inheritance conflict, mostly brief, strained encounters. Sarah and I still spoke, but she was clearly navigating her own complex feelings and our mother's pressure. I debated whether to go to Thanksgiving dinner at my mother's house. My therapist encouraged me to think about what I needed, not what they expected. I decided to go, but with clear intentions. I would be polite, I would not engage in arguments, and if things became toxic, I would leave. It wasn't about seeking reconciliation anymore. It was about showing up on my own terms, empowered by the boundaries I had set. When I arrived, the atmosphere was immediately tense. My mother greeted me coolly. David gave me a curt nod. Sarah seemed relieved I was there, but also nervous. Other relatives were present, some still seeming a bit distant, others treating me normally. The dinner was stiff. Conversation revolved around superficial topics. Every time I spoke, I felt like I was under scrutiny. Then, inevitably, the subject of my father came up, and my mother, with seemingly innocent intent that I knew was anything but, said, "It's so good that David has stepped up and taken over so many of your father's responsibilities. He's been such a rock, helping me manage everything." It was a subtle jab, highlighting my perceived lack of help compared to David, and likely a reference back to the estate issues. The old me would have felt the familiar knot in my stomach, maybe mumbled a defensive response, or just shrunk back. But the new me, the one who had been working so hard to find her voice and stand in her truth, didn't flinch. I smiled politely and said clearly, "David has certainly been helpful with some things. And I've found my own way to honor Dad's memory and his legacy." My mother's eyes narrowed slightly. "Oh, and what exactly is that, Emily?" Her tone suggested skepticism and challenge. This was it. The moment to speak my truth, not apologetically, but confidently. "I've been using the tools Dad left me," I said, my voice steady, projecting across the table. "I've been working in a workshop, building things, learning more about the craft he loved so much. It's been incredibly healing, connecting with him in that way. It feels like I'm carrying on a part of who he was, a part he specifically wanted to share with me." There was a beat of silence. My mother looked furious, her face tightening. David looked uncomfortable, glancing down at his plate. Sarah gave me a small, tentative smile. Some of the other relatives looked intrigued, others surprised. My mother recovered quickly. "Well, I'm sure that's nice," she said, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "Though I still think that money could have been used for something more important, like fixing the roof." And there it was. The dismissal, the financial jab, the attempt to bring it back to her narrative of my selfishness. But I wasn't going to take the bait and get dragged into an argument about money again. "We can agree to disagree on that, Mother," I said calmly. "Dad wanted me to have the means to do this, and I'm grateful that I can." David then tried to redirect, forcing a conversation about something else entirely, and the moment passed, but the air was thick with unspoken tension. I had said what I needed to say. I hadn't gotten an apology or even understanding, but I hadn't crumbled. I hadn't been silenced. I had stated my truth and stood by my father's wishes, and by doing so, I had stood by myself. The rest of the evening was difficult. My mother continued to make passive-aggressive comments, and David avoided eye contact. I kept my interactions brief and polite, excusing myself early, citing tiredness. As I left, I felt a mix of exhaustion from the tension and a quiet satisfaction. I had faced them, not with anger or desperation, but with a grounded sense of self and purpose. The resolution with my family isn't a neat, happy ending. The dynamics have changed permanently. My relationship with my mother is distant. We have sporadic contact, mostly brief phone calls that skirt around anything too emotional or contentious. The underlying resentment from her side is still palpable, but my boundaries prevent it from impacting me as deeply as it once did. I no longer seek her approval or understanding. My relationship with David is strained. We are cordial, but not close. He still seems to align himself with our mother, but he no longer actively engages in attacking me. There's an awkwardness between us, a recognition of the rift that opened, perhaps a silent regret on his part, but no effort to truly mend it. Sarah and I are closer now than before, bonded by our shared experience of navigating the family dysfunction, even if she couldn't fully stand up against it herself. We talk regularly, offering each other support and understanding. The family gatherings I attend are infrequent and approached with caution. I go if I feel up to it, if I think I can handle the atmosphere, and I always have an exit strategy. It's not the warm, connected family I once longed for, but it's a dynamic I can manage without sacrificing my well-being. Turning my pain into purpose wasn't a linear path. There were setbacks, moments of doubt, days when the grief and the hurt felt overwhelming again. But each time, I returned to my workshop, to my therapy, to my friends, to the strength I had found within myself. The woodworking became more than just a hobby. It became a symbol of my resilience, a tangible representation of taking something broken, the wood, my spirit, and shaping it into something new, functional, and beautiful. The workshop money wasn't wasted on sawdust. It built a space where I could heal and create. My father's tools are no longer just tools. They are a connection to him, a reminder of his belief in me, and a symbol of the purpose his loss ultimately helped me find. His memory, once a source of agonizing pain compounded by my family's reaction, is now a source of quiet strength and inspiration. I learned that grief is not a weakness, but a testament to love. I learned that true family supports you when you are most vulnerable, and that sometimes the people closest to you are the ones who hurt you the most. I learned that setting boundaries isn't selfish. It's an act of self-preservation and self-respect. And most importantly, I learned that I didn't need anyone else's validation to know my own worth or to process my own experiences. My father saw me, and that was enough. His love was the true inheritance, and no one could take that from me. The experience was devastating, but it forced me to confront difficult truths and to build a life defined by my own values and strength, not by the expectations or limitations my family tried to place on me. I found my voice, my purpose, and a profound sense of peace that comes from living authentically, even when it means challenging the status quo and redefining what family means. Thank you for listening to my story. It's been difficult to share, but also cathartic. If anything in my story resonated with you, the feeling of being misunderstood by family, the pain of betrayal, the struggle to set boundaries, please share your own experiences in the comments below. Connecting with others who have gone through similar things can be incredibly healing. If this story struck a chord or offered you any comfort or insight, please hit that like button. It truly helps. And if you want to hear more stories like this, stories about overcoming challenges and finding strength in difficult circumstances, don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Remember, your pain is valid, and you have the power to turn it into purpose. Speak your truth, set your boundaries, and never let anyone define your worth.